Well, hello everybody, and welcome to our latest edition of Infection Control Matters, and again in person with Martin. G'day, Martin.
Hello, Brett. I nearly forgot my name.
And we've got another special guest with us, Jon Otter. So welcome.
I don't count as a special guest.
You are.
You are a special guest.
Yeah, a special guest.
I didn't know that a podcast voice was a thing.
Oh, no.
It's just switched on his podcast.
No. It is a thing. I mean, the one we did in your room at IPS, that's in the top 10. I'm sorry, I should rephrase that in the light of political statement.
Top 10 of what?
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to have a chat, and we wanted to talk to you about, you just put a blog up on your Gloves Off campaign. We were listening to Rose Gallagher this morning from the RCN also talking about, the overuse of gloves. So what made you think, okay, we're going to go with this at Guys and Tommies, and how are you going to go about it?
So gloves has been a big feature of the pandemic, hasn't it?
Yeah.
And when the first IPC COVID guidance came out in the middle of the night on a Friday for a bank holiday weekend, it said effectively you've got to wear gloves for all direct patient care. And looking back, I regret that maybe I didn't push back harder about that locally at the time, because I think we could have said.
Would they have listened nationally?
Nationally, no, but locally, maybe.
Okay.
But that was quite hard because it was national guidance and there was a lot going on.
Yeah.
So I think we sort of had to follow the national steer. But now things have changed. We've got the new National Infection Control Manual, and it opens the door to a much better and clearer-minded approach to the use of gloves during patient care.
Still a lot of glove use in it, though, the contact precautions. I mean, they've got a Bacillus cereus infection, needs contact precautions. I'm not really quite sure why, although it would explain why when you get served a Chinese takeaway, they're handling the rice with gloves. But I think it still was pushing it a little bit too far, I think, with contact precautions for many things that actually our skin's a pretty good barrier.
I agree. And we can definitely talk about contact precautions. But I think for me, the vast majority of patient care is not transmission-based precautions. It's just a relatively routine, relatively low-risk interaction between a healthcare worker and a patient. And there we need to be asking the question, do I need to wear a pair of gloves? And I've really asked for, in detail for the first time, okay, well, when do we need a pair of gloves? Brett, when do we need gloves?
Well, actually, before I even get to when do we need gloves, I think the question is, why are we using gloves? And the consequences of inappropriate glove use is important.
Yeah.
And, Rose Gallagher's chat today at the IPS Welsh Study Day is an interesting one from an environmental point of view. The huge amount of waste that it creates is phenomenal. I mean, the paper that she presented and you tweeted, John, I think, it was a 12 billion.
12 billion.
Sets of gloves.
I know.
I mean, it's just
mind-boggling, isn't it? Really,
it's just insane. That's got to go somewhere.
Yeah,
it's got to be produced, and so the impact is huge. And then when we use gloves in clinical settings when they're not appropriate, because of perhaps a false sense of security and misuse, is potentially going to lead to some transmission events.
Yeah.
So I think one of the easy and clear times we need gloves is when we're dealing with blood or bodily fluids. I mean, for me, that's pretty clear cut. If you're going to clean up something that's, blood so sodden or feces, whatever it might be, you want to go wear gloves. Now, at the other end of the spectrum, we're thinking about things like MRSA, VRE for contact precautions. I think we probably don't need gloves, is my sort of personal view on that. So, and it's the grey areas in between, I think, that we need to work through as well.
How are you selling it to staff then, John? Because they've been used to wearing gloves for virtually everything. As soon as they come through the door, a pair of gloves goes on. And with luck, they change between patients, but not necessarily always either. But, how are you going to get over this message to staff, and how's it going down, really, the campaign so far?
So before we get to that, I think there's another reason why, or a consequence of wearing gloves and overusing gloves, and that's the patient perspective. So if you're a patient in healthcare, certainly before COVID, the qualitative analysis, see, Martin, I'm into it.
Yeah, very good, John.
Tells
I'm
us
a convert, a sinner.
Patients don't really like being cared for with gloves. Obviously, there's mixed opinions. Some people makes them feel safe, but generally speaking, patients feel a bit grubby if a healthcare worker has to wear gloves to care for them. So I think the patient perspective is an important driver in all of this. How is it landing? Really well. Really well. I think people are ready to get rid of the gloves.
Okay.
When I've been out in the wards.
That's really reassuring, actually, because I thought that might be a hard sell. So that's good news.
You generally kind of gently challenge the practice. Why are you wearing gloves? What's the logic? And they say, because you told me to for 2 years.
Yeah. Okay. And any concerns about actually the infection control team being seen to, hang on a minute, they can't make their minds up when they're rowing back on something they've been teaching us to do for years?
Absolutely, yes. But to be honest, it's happened so many times over the past 2 years. I think I'm much more used to rolling with it.
Okay.
And just saying, yeah, we were saying that.
Yeah.
Things have changed. And
that's actually nothing wrong with that,
exactly.
Is there? Showing you're changing your mind with the evidence and actually we don't need to do something is fine.
And also acknowledging maybe we got it wrong.
Yeah.
Maybe way back when we should have done this, but we had a lot going on, as I said before. So I think if you gently challenge the logic, most staff will say, oh yeah, you're right. Actually, that means I don't need to wear gloves. Brilliant. So yeah, I think it's landing really well.
Yeah.
We've decided to run a campaign and we've called it glove or no glove.
Okay.
And there's some ideas maybe about some gamification later on down the line.
Okay.
But you'll have heard of the RCN campaign, which is gloves off.
Yeah.
But for that, just felt a little bit pinchy.
Okay.
Maybe the message behind
gloves on or gloves off?
Glove or no glove?
Glove or no glove?
So we want staff to ask the question in their mind whenever they're doing something, glove or no glove.
And are you doing that posters or how are you actually getting the message out then?
Yeah, multi-channel, posters, digital, and maybe some fun stuff planned down the line.
And what's your key messages about glove on? When you're saying glove on always?
Yeah. Essentially, if it's wet and sticky and not yours. I mean that's not the formal line, but that's what we're trying to get staff to think. It's really body fluid exposure. That's the key risk. Some sterile procedures you might want to think about gloves, but everything else I really begin to question it. If you look at the evidence, why during contact precautions, unless you've got body fluid exposure within that, would you want to wear gloves? It introduces all the risks and the benefit isn't there. Yes, you might contaminate your hands with an MDRO from the patient, but you wash them using hand hygiene. And if you're wearing gloves, you contaminate your gloves and you still have to deal with that.
That's right.
And actually, it becomes easier if you're doing multiple procedures on the same patient. I remember very early on when we started doing the podcast, I did one with Lorraine Herwalter. It showed that people always did procedures out of order. They did the most risky procedures first for contamination and then went on to the cleaner things.
Right.
And hand hygiene wasn't always 100%. And if you're wearing gloves, you've then got to take your glove off, clean your hand and put a new pair of glove on. Yeah. Whereas if you're dealing with something dirty on a patient and suddenly they go, oh, I need you to do that quickly. Yeah. You can gel your hands very quickly. Yeah. So it's got to speed up care processes and make it much easier to do the right thing, doesn't it? If you've not actually got a glove on. Yeah.
Now, I was going to ask John, because the glove on, we can deal with it from an IPC perspective, but people use gloves, as you just touched on, about clinical procedures. Yeah. Are you going down the route of looking at all those different types of procedures that are done and going, yes, a glove, and if it's a glove, the type of glove that's needed? Yeah. Because that's a grayer area, I guess.
I mean, exactly that. We've engaged with key stakeholders that understand the sort of pharmaceutical aspects and cytotoxic drugs that we have out there to try and pull up a list of common procedures, the things we do often, glove on column, glove off. Because I think staff like simple messaging because there's lots of things to take in, isn't there? Lots of change going on.
We tried questionnaires the staff. What would you do you think you can do without gloves for these procedures? And then maybe there'll be some things on that you think, well, actually, you probably can. So there's an area where we might need to target because they still think they're going to need gloves for that, whereas actually the evidence says you won't.
It's a great idea. We should definitely do that.
Yeah.
And I'm keen to push this even further. If we look within our respiratory pathway, where logically you might say, well, the patient's got a respiratory infection. They're going to be coughing everywhere. Of course, you wear gloves. Yeah. But in fact, many of our patients on a respiratory pathway are either asymptomatic or have very few respiratory symptoms. So even within a respiratory pathway, I think we can question whether we need gloves all the time by rote, or whether we still make that risk assessment of the patient in front of us and the task at hand.
Are you getting anybody throwing it at you that, you're just doing this to save money? And procurement are pushing this? Or
no, we haven't had that yet. Okay. Maybe some people feel like
they might do now Martin's mentioned.
Yeah, thanks, Martin.
What about, so I'm going to give a really specific example, and you maybe can't do it off the top of your head, but preparing antibiotics. Yeah. Injecting into a vial, mixing it up. Gloves on, gloves off.
Generally, I start with gloves off, and I ask the question, why would you want to put gloves on? What are you trying to stop in that situation? I suppose what you might say is, actually, I've got quite a few bugs on my hands. I don't want that getting into.
I've been pruning the roses at the weekend, and I've got grazes everywhere.
I don't. Yeah. I don't want to get into my sterile production or sterile infusion. Maybe gloves might reduce the risk of getting a bug in that infusion, but it won't take away a risk altogether. So I think that's probably right on the borderline.
Yeah, that's why I asked it. And reverse, what about then, I guess, the argument to say, well, I don't want the antibiotics on my fingers because I don't want to have that colonising and just all disrupting rather the normal flora of my hands.
Yeah, that's fair enough. That would be another reason to do it. So that's quite a good example, and maybe you would wear gloves there. What do you think?
Yeah, I asked that question because I'm sort of sitting on the fence. I can kind of see both sides. And so I wondered where your thoughts. My thought is probably tend to wear them more than not wear them, purely from the point of view of that risk of, when you stick something in a vial, you get a bit of antibiotic, might squirt back out.
Yeah.
What are you going to do with your hands afterwards? Yes, of course you should wash them, but that sort of, are you going to disrupt and have antibiotics in an area that perhaps we don't want them?
Yeah.
I'd be interested to do a little study with not antibiotics in the vial, but see actually, with something fluorescent to actually see how often when you're preparing something in a tube, would you actually get contaminated in that way?
Maybe it's not even an issue.
It may be not be an issue at all, but I'm not sure anyone's ever looked at it, and that'd be quite an easy thing to mock up, really, to try and publish a paper saying, well, we tried this on 300 people, mixing up a pseudo antibiotic, and we showed no contamination. Therefore, we've got some evidence that this is safe.
Yeah, it's good.
That'd be easy enough to do. Any idea what sort of savings? Going on the saving thing, I know that's not a prime motivator, but it is good from an environmental point of view. But actually, it means the hospital could invest some money in something else.
Hat.
Yeah, hat would be good.
Yeah. So we're actually linking up quite closely with the sustainability team in the trust to co-lead the program. And I don't know if you found this, but sometimes sustainability can be seen as the enemy of infection control because we like single-use products because they're less contamination risk. Obviously, sustainability wants to reprocess products to the extent possible. So there's sometimes some tension there, but on this, we have complete common ground because it's improving our carbon footprint, it's reducing our waste, and it's saving money. As to the extent, I don't actually know.
Okay.
Are you going to evaluate?
You don't know what your glove spend is annually, but it'd be interesting to look at that. And actually, all the storage space that suddenly gets freed up a bit by the shelves that are racked out with gloves at the moment.
I mean, I know
potential.
We know that we spend loads of money on gloves. We use 44 million gloves every year in one single NHS trust, and we're very keen to measure the impact of this campaign and try and put some numbers to the impact, because that will help others to do something similar, I expect.
Yeah, and the follow-up qualitative study asking staff, do they feel safer, do they feel confident, that sort of stuff. I bet you can't wait to get your hands on that.
Absolutely, I'm raring to
interviewing.
Well, that was my question. I was going to ask about the evaluation side and staff, and it's a good point, mate, about storage. All those extra benefits that might flow. It'd be really interesting to see, okay, say it saves money or has these extra benefits. How is that money reinvested? It's a separate question, but
I suspect you'll never find out.
No. This gets used up somewhere else. But it's an interesting thought, because you have a fixed finite budget, essentially, supposedly. And so when there is a clear saving, it'd be great to say, look, any chance 5% of that saving can be reinvested back into a new IPC initiative to deal with an issue that we can't actually support and fund right now.
I used to have things like that when I was in clinical practice. I'd think we need to do that. But I know that there's some product that we could maybe save some money on. So you go along and say, look, we want to do this. But to offset it, here's one I prepared earlier. We can save a bit of money on that.
I do exactly
Procurement would take that.
Yeah,
they would take that argument.
I did that in an NHS trust here many years ago. It was a product saving to do with paper hand towels. And I said, look, can we get a proportion of that saving back to the IPC team to invest in some projects?
I did that 1 year ago on paper hand towels. And what happened was procurement bought very cheap paper hand towels that weren't very pleasant at all. Yeah. And then the patients found that it was toilet roll. Sorry, I've got it all wrong round. The trust decided to save money on toilet roll, and the toilet roll became so unpleasant that the patients worked out that the hand towels were actually much nicer to use. So they saved a few thousand on toilet roll and spent, I think, about £70,000 on unblocking the sewage system. So,
Yeah, well, that's been an interesting topic. When do you reckon you'll get to a point of looking to be able to evaluate? Is it 6 months from now or 12 months from now? What's your sort of?
I don't know. We haven't got any clear time points scheduled into the plan, but we can maybe look in 3 or 4 weeks' time and see whether we've seen an immediate impact. That'd be
Because this
lovely.
is the whole trust initiative, so you're not phasing it in over different areas. So you should see something within a month.
Exactly. That's the hope.
Okay.
And then 3, 4, 5, 6 months down the line, we can begin to think about what the evaluation looks like.
Because it's good, isn't it? Because if you start and get early messages, positive messages after a month, and you start pumping out there, we did this, and look what the impact has already been, then people get on a spiral of confidence equals success equals actually there's no bad downside equals success, and then they keep on going in that area as well. So that's good.
Yeah, exactly right.
For MRSA VRE now, are you using gloves?
Yeah.
And okay, and that's not changing as part of this?
We are definitely challenging that.
Yeah.
So we're asking staff to think really clearly. And in fact, in our new respiratory pathway guidance for PPE, we've given staff an out of requiring gloves. So we're asking staff to think, is the patient symptomatic? Is there body fluid exposure risk? So certainly for contact precautions, the same would apply.
So that's another nice qualitative study. If you're giving staff an out, how many people took the out and why did they take the out? And why didn't they take the out? See, the qualitative research possibilities of GSTT are absolutely enormous.
They are enormous. I want to try to embrace them, Mark.
You must. But you're trying to employ a clinical scientist now, or somebody with an interest in the environment, aren't you?
Absolutely.
You need a social scientist in the team.
Oh, that's a great idea. Wouldn't that be amazing?
That to me is, we've been talking about Are We Experts on podcasts that went out today, and actually having somebody who's really interested in behaviour change, who's actually part of the team, and a social scientist in the team, that would be a really interesting thing to do, because the amount of work they could do and help us.
I have had a little bit of that in a previous life. In a previous trust, we had a social scientist who was almost seconded to the team during the early part of the pandemic when we were doing our PPE helper program, and that really helped to establish the program. So that's a good idea.
Yeah.
He has them occasionally.
Unfortunately, by the time this podcast goes out, I'll have forgotten that idea. That's the problem. They float through my brain, and there we go. Anyway,
cool.
Looks like John has to go. He's a busy man, and it's been a great pleasure to see you and catch up. Fantastic session this morning, of course, on what do we learn from COVID, which we won't talk about now because we haven't got enough time, unfortunately, but maybe another day.
Indeed. Thanks very much for your time, John. Great to see you again.
Good to see you both.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And catch you again on another edition of Infection Control Matters.